Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 431 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and an author. Our fifth book just came out. It's called Perseverance and How to Be a Great Fraternity or Sorority Alumnus. So go and pick up that book on Amazon or Barnes & Noble today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, I want everybody listening to try yoga and meditation. I actually took a college course on yoga 25 years ago, and the lessons that I learned in that class still allow me to rest every single part of my body and go to sleep in less than 1 minute at night. And also, meditation, that's a great way to start your day. There are plenty of apps out there that can help you with that process if you're not familiar with it. Try some different apps, see which ones might work for you. And our next guest is going to give us some additional secrets to college life success. As Clint Pardoe was about to graduate from college, he didn't know what he wanted to do with his degree in business. This, combined with the ending of a romantic relationship, led him to experiencing overt anxiety, which led to depression, which led to some deep soul searching. He spent the next year waiting tables and obsessively reading books about personal growth and spirituality. Inspired by a former professor, Clint went to graduate school to teach public speaking and interpersonal communication classes at the college level. And after a few years of doing so, he did some postgraduate work in business and life coaching. This led him to writing The Four Secrets to College Life Success and speaking and coaching in both the college and also the real estate markets. A decade later, 2 decades after this whole journey started, Clint felt called. He felt called to refocus his energy on speaking at colleges, and he now offers two programs. The first one is Awaken Your Potential. The other one is Wake Up Call. He also hosts a weekly podcast like meditation and conversation where in community, college students can awaken to and live more of their full potential. Welcome to the show, Clint.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it is my pleasure. I think public speaking is such an important skill, and I talk about it all of the time. What's interesting about you is that back in 1999, you actually started teaching public speaking and interpersonal communication courses as an adjunct professor. So I'm wondering what made you get into teaching, and why do you think public speaking is so important for our students?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, indicative of the introduction that you shared about my experience with, anxiety and depression, which really hit me kind of my senior year in college. Um, in the midst of my soul searching, I was, reading all kinds of books on personal growth and development, and having just gotten out of a romantic relationship. Of course, one of my interests were in communication and relationships. So I was reading a lot of stuff on that. And interestingly enough, during that time frame, my younger sister was taking a communication and relationship class at the college that I went to with my former public speaking professor. What I loved about public speaking as a college student in that class is that my public speaking professor was also a marriage and family therapist. So upon reflection, he was teaching a lot of relationship, life, practical skills in the context of that classroom. So I actually went and visited my sister's class, asked if I could come back and join her during one of her classes with that professor. And I can't recall, because this was, 1995-ish. I can't recall exactly if the professor said it to the classroom or he said it to me afterwards, given my situation. But he basically, encouraged me to, or inspired me to consider public speaking as a career. And I was inspired by him to kind of do the same thing. Here I was 24, 25 years old, learning a lot of practical life skills. And what I realized he did in his public speaking class was integrate a lot of those life skills into that classroom. So, I wasn't necessarily like public speaking per se, wasn't the draw for me initially. Ironically, on the back end, it became the draw for me, but it was the ability for me to integrate life concepts into the classroom that drew me to teaching public speaking. So that's what I did. I mean, that as soon as I went to graduate school and started teaching public speaking, 25 years old when the students weren't that much younger than me, I started doing that very thing. And, it resonated with the students because even to this day, classes like communication, relationships, et cetera, they're not necessarily required classes. The good news is, at least at the colleges I taught in Northern California, um, public speaking is a requirement at most colleges. And I think it is an important skill because, as you very well know, no matter what you're doing in your career moving forward, communication is absolutely key. And what I love about public speaking, even if you choose not to do it as a career or in your career, it provides a framework from which to communicate more effectively. I've I've become a better writer because of it. I've seen people become better writers because of it. I've seen people become better communicators just in everyday conversation because they know how to organize certain things in certain ways that they learn with public speaking. So I definitely think it's an important skill, whether you choose to stand in front of people or not, as a way to organize your thoughts and, hopefully more effectively communicate them no matter what context you're communicating in.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I wish that every college or university would make that a mandatory course because just like you said, no matter who you are, whatever your job is, you're always going to have to sell yourself. If you think about, let's say, a job interview as an example, you have to sell yourself. You have to be able to articulate your thoughts and ideas in a clear and concise manner. And if you don't have those public speaking skills, boy, oh boy, you're missing out on some of those soft skills that employers are really looking for these days.
Yep.
Now, you also work for Youth Speaker University. What exactly is that organization and what do you do for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I so I was speaking in the college market professionally simultaneously while I was teaching as an adjunct professor,
Mhm.
and I ended up keynoting a national conference, which was one of my goals back in 2010 in front of a couple thousand college students. And then my business hit a plateau, and I was doing everything on my own. I have a business background, public speaking background, all the things, but I can only take myself so far. And I was searching for, like, I needed some mentorship. And back then, this was 2010. There wasn't 100 different speaker training programs being flooded on the internet and getting advertised. And so I did a lot of research for like a year, and I was finally introduced to a guy by the name of Josh Shipp. Turns out Josh Shipp had a program called Youth Speaker University, where he would train either new speakers, which I wasn't at the time, or established speakers to help make a greater impact and income speaking to both students and educators. And so I got introduced to him via email through a mutual friend, and found out about this program. And I was like, this is what I've been looking for. So I went through the program back in 2011. And then, based upon my background that we just kind of went through, Josh approached me to be the lead coach for his organization. So I stopped teaching in the classroom in 2012, and I transitioned into the lead coach role for that organization, which I've been doing for over a decade now. So my main role in that organization, as the title of my role is lead coach, is I'm really the main person who helps to coach our students through the program so that they can actually make a greater impact and income speaking to students and educators.
That is fantastic. What a great resource that is for students that want to improve their public speaking skills. You're also the author of The Four Secrets to College Life Success. In there, you talk about the need for physical health, which I certainly understand, pretty self-explanatory, but you also talk about emotional balance. What exactly is emotional balance?
Yeah, that's another great question. Before I answer, I just want a quick side note on the Youth Speaker University thing. So yeah, it's a great resource for students who perhaps want to, refine their public speaking skills, but really at the heart of it, and I wish I would have known this, I wish it would have existed back when I was either a college student or even teaching as a professor, is it provides students who want to be speakers as a career. I mean, I know you do it professionally, I do it professionally.
Mhm.
It's like, if students are like, hey, can public speaking actually be a viable career direction, not just a required course or perhaps something that can help my communication skills? That's it's a real path that's possible. So I just want to throw that out there in addition to what you just said. Regarding the emotional balance, I mean, balance is not the kind of the gist of balance is not too high, not too low with emotions. And I think in terms of emotional balance, from my perspective, it all starts with emotional awareness, which I didn't have until later in life. And I think the sooner people can have some emotional awareness, the better, because, we have emotions we experience all the time. And so, one of the things that I recommend, at this particular juncture in my presentations to college students, in my book, and all of that, is really, as a first step, is just starting to ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? Because most people aren't aware of what's going on within them right this second. And so just that very question, how am I feeling right now, can help start to navigate, like, what emotions am I experiencing? And are these optimal emotions that I want to be experiencing? And what are the things I can do to express myself healthily when feeling certain emotions? What can I do in terms of tools to navigate my emotional landscape? Again, these are all things that I have found in my own personal journey, as well as working with, college students for as long as I have, that aren't necessarily the norm. And it really dictates a lot of our lives, right? A lot of our decisions as human beings are made on a regular basis, on a daily basis, based upon our emotional state, right? Do we feel like doing something? Do we not feel like doing something? Are we angry at this person? Are we not angry at this person? Like, what is our experience, and how do we most effectively navigate that? So, a few of the things, just a couple quick tools, other than what I've shared, is, I think one of the biggest things for college students to do, other than start to become aware of their emotional state, is um, is especially if you're wanting to change it and you're not content with how you're experiencing yourself on a regular basis, is talking to somebody. I think that stigma has gotten lifted over the years, and there's a lot of progress, but, like, that's one of the most effective things you can do, is just talking stuff out. And it doesn't even have to be professionally, just even talking to close friends and stuff. But if it becomes a need to talk to a counselor or something like that can be really, really useful. And then, of course, if, for the more introverted people out there, if they're not really comfortable at first talking with somebody, you can journal and do just kind of journaling exercises about how you're feeling, and all that kind of stuff. And then, releasing your emotions. If you don't want to talk to somebody and the journaling doesn't do it, one of the most profound things that I learned a number of years ago, especially around, like, the emotion of anger, which I think oftentimes, especially in our culture, is almost like, ooh, it's like a taboo emotion to have, um, is like screaming in a pillow, or hitting something, right? Taking a kickboxing class. Like, there's different ways to channel. As a matter of fact, I have found, and this is the last thing I'll say about the emotional piece, is that especially with anger, as somebody who, growing up, I kind of suppressed anger, wasn't necessarily the most comfortable thing to discuss or express, is that anger, when channeled effectively, actually turns into passion. It's the suppression of the anger can actually lead to depression, because we're not actually expressing it. So it's about emotional awareness, and emotional balance often has to do with, the channeling of that emotion in the most powerful way. And then when you do that, oftentimes can leave you with this feeling of emotional balance, because if you have this unexpressed emotion, that messes with how you feel on a regular basis. If you express it healthily, it releases it. And then oftentimes, in my experience, the underlying experience of all of that turns into peace. And I don't know about you, but, who doesn't want more peace in their lives?
I definitely want more peace. Those are excellent suggestions. I love it. Talking to somebody else, journaling. Every college campus has a counseling center, and you're paying for those counselors that are sitting there with your tuition. So you might as well walk in and talk to somebody if you're going through something. But I think you're right. I think, it's just there's so much stigma around going to the counseling center. What if somebody sees me walking into the counseling center? Am I somehow broken? None of
Yep.
that is true. I think I wish that as a college student, I took advantage of the counseling center when I was a college student. I didn't discover counseling until I was an adult, and I waited way too long. In
I'm right there
hindsight, it
with
would have
you.
been so
Yeah.
much better to talk to somebody back then.
100%. Absolutely.
Oh boy, oh boy. All right. So, you started talking about tools, which I thought is really helpful, like the journaling for emotional balance. What are some communication tools that students can use in order to improve their relationships with family, friends, teachers, even significant others on campus?
Yeah, that's another great question. Having taught communication classes for so long, I have a plethora of tools, but for the purposes of this interview and just giving some things to work with, I'm gonna give you my top three, and I'm gonna give you my top three that I have found to work most effectively with college students. And interestingly enough, um, they're the three that I would bring into my classes that were not in the textbook, that I learned outside of kind of the communication research scope of things, in other programs and other research I did, et cetera. So first and foremost, and these are in order of like I recommend importance. Um, Number one is to notice who you're being. And what I mean by that is that similar to emotions, and emotions can play a role in this for sure. There's an integration here and a connection. Is that in every moment, we as human beings are showing up certain ways. Okay. In one moment, we might be powerful. In another moment, we might be shy. In another moment, we might be a jerk. In another moment, we might be kind. So, the research does show that 93% of our communication is nonverbal, and this falls into that category. So it's not so much what we say, it's who we're being when we say it. Because you can say, I love you as a jerk, right? There's a jerky undertone or a sarcastic undertone. So I think it's really, really, really important to notice like how are we showing up? Because we all have different gifts and we all have different strengths and weaknesses, right? We're human again. So it's like, who am I showing up as? And I think that, again, that contemplative question in and of itself is one of the most important communication tools, because you can learn all the tools in terms of what to say here and all that, but it's like, okay, and who am I being when I'm saying it? Because that influences how it's going to be received, how you're going to say it, all of those things. So that's number one. Number two is if you have a complaint about something, okay, which I'm sure we all do from time to time, right? Um, I think an important question to ask yourself is it really worth complaining about? And if it's not, letting that go, because sometimes we can spin on stuff that's totally unnecessary to spin on. But if it is, if there's something like, this is really bothering me, is what is the request that you have of the person that of the thing that's bothering you? So if every time you're talking to your best friend, they poke fun at you and they joke with you, and even though they're trying to do it in a joking friend manner, it bothers you, and you found yourself just, over the course of time getting irritated by it. It's like, if you're genuinely irritated by it, you can make a request like, hey, you know, I know your intentions are probably good with poking at me, but look, my request is that you don't do that, because I feel, it doesn't feel good to me when you do it. So I think it's a powerful tool for people to use when they don't like something. Is like, what's your request? Because if you don't have a request for the other human being, you're really not moving the relationship forward, and then you're just spinning and complaining, etc. And oftentimes if you don't make the request, the person doesn't even know that you have the complaint, right? So it's like not fair to them, and they're part of the relationship, to either in that context stop the joking because they don't know it bothers you, right? And there's just this underlying dynamic in the relationship that affects it. So I found that simple tool. It's like, what's my complaint, and is it powerful for me to make a request, or am I just complaining? Oh, you know what? I'm just complaining. I'm going to let it go. Or it's like, oh man, this keeps bothering me. What's my request? And then have a conversation from there. The third and final thing I'll mention to you, that is also falls into the nonverbal category, is listening. I think we advocate a lot of talking. I mean, I'm a public speaker. You're a public speaker. We're talking on a podcast. Um, it's so important, equally important, I think, is the listening component. just being silent and doing what you're doing right now, right? Like the nonverbal nodding and the reflecting back of like, this is what I heard you say, like just being present with the other person, because again, who doesn't want to be listened to and heard? And I think a lot, and I think, we don't have to get political or anything on this call, but I think a lot of what's going on in the dynamic of our country at this point is a lot of people just want to be listened to, right? Just want to be heard,
Yep.
period, end of story. And oftentimes just hearing other people's perspectives and opinions and really hearing them and listening to them, even if you don't agree with them, can solve a lot. And that's true in, everyday relationships. So those are my top three for now. I have more, but that's what I'm going to give you in the context of the time we have.
I love it. I think it's great. And I talk about that a lot too, even in fraternity and sorority, is that we love to like vote on things. There's a motion, we make the vote, and 60% say yes, we're going to do this, 40% say no, and we just say, okay, 60%, the ayes have it, and we just move forward. Well, what about the 40% that just said no? Like, don't we still
Right.
need them? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and it's like, so I often talk about just building consensus versus going with majority rules, right? It takes a little
Mm,
bit longer to build
sure.
consensus,
Yep.
but at least when you're building consensus and you go to the people, the 40% that said no in that example, and you ask them, why did you say no?
Yeah.
Typically, they just want to be heard, to your point. They
Mm,
just want to be heard. And if they're heard and, an overwhelming majority of the people say we're going in another direction, I think they will go along with it. It's just they want to be heard. They just want their opinions to be out there in the ether so that way people know how they feel. They understand they're not going to win every single vote. I don't think either one of us expect to win every single vote in our lives, but we at least want our opinions heard. And I think that's important to, keep them as an engaged member and then continue building with them in the future. So
I agree, man. Should we be running for president and vice president? Is that
I
what I'm
mean,
hearing out of this
listen,
call?
I would say to you, the American public has already kind of given their opinion of who's running right now. So I think you and I stand a much better chance of running as president and vice president at this point, because I think most Americans will take anything but the options we have today. That's another whole podcast. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about too is time management, because the
Mm,
college students that I'm talking to every day, they're really stressed out. They're really overcommitted between work and family life and their relationships and the fraternity and sorority and schoolwork and all of these things. They're really doing the best that they can, but I think
yep.
that they're very overcommitted at times. So,
Yep.
what are some tips for college students in order to improve their time management skills?
Yep. Another great question. I'm gonna go off what you just said. You said I think what I remember you saying is overcommit. Well,
Yeah,
that's what I heard you say.
yeah, that is.
And I think my first piece of advice is stop saying yes to everything.
Yeah,
I think we tend to do that in our culture a lot too,
yeah,
just kind of generally speaking, is like we take too much on,
yeah,
and we create our own chaos and misery. So
right.
stop saying yes to everything. And then number two, what you do say yes to, and this is something I learned probably, I'm guessing 5 to 7 years ago, and it's been transformative for me in my business as well as my life in general, and it fits right in with college students, on time management. Is there was research done by the guy named Paul Graham, and Paul Graham, his research was referenced in a book called The One Thing. It was a New York Times bestseller about producing extraordinary results in a small amount of time. So it was all about time management, time efficiency, goal setting. And what this research showed is that the most effective, and again, research is general, it may or may not apply to you, but what it showed is that the most effective way to schedule your day is the first half of the day, you be the maker. And I'll explain what that means in a second. And then the second half of the day, you be the manager. So really, you split your day into two halves.
Mhm.
And, having run a business as long as I have and worked with entrepreneurs in the past and actually currently too, um, is that, the 40-hour work week oftentimes is non-existent. People are working way more than that these days. And it contributes to health, I think, in our culture and with college students, et cetera. Um, my recommendation, and this is just to play with it, because oftentimes people can't manage their time effectively because they don't have boundaries and a schedule already set. So here's where this research comes into play that's really important. Is if you're, so my recommendation is like schedule out 40 hours a week, no more than that, for your schooling. Okay, period. Because that's your job right now as a college student. So schooling only 40 hours a week. And really the maker time of it, the first half of your day, is that's homework. Because the research shows is that we resist the thing we want to do the least first. So do the hardest thing first. And most students don't want to do homework, in my experience. I didn't as a student. So the first half of your day, you literally, so I'm going to keep this really simple. Let's say you wake up at 10 o'clock in the morning. We'll give you a little leeway here. And you're done at 6 in this context. So from 10 to 2, you're doing homework. You wake up in the morning, you're doing your homework right off the bat. Boom, you're in it. And then the second half of the day, and this is where, for college students listening right now, you're probably not going to be able to do it this semester or this quarter, but moving forward, something to consider is that the second half of your day, the manager part is really attending classes. So that's the learning part, right? So there's the learning and there's the application. So in the context of this research, the maker is the application, the manager is the learning. So if you can schedule your classes, and again, this is in this example, from 2 to 6, the majority of the time, then it would be more in alignment with this research. So that you can do homework in the morning, attend classes, and you do that. And then now you've got a container for which you can set boundaries, right? Now you've got, if most people know if they only have 4 hours to do something, they got to get something done, right? And then what's cool about this process that I found for my own self is, and of course the people that I work with, is that once you have that container for your schooling in this case, now you can schedule, now you're going to have, dude, now you're going to have what, 8 hours left in your day?
Yeah.
Depending upon how much sleep you get, which is a recommended 8 hours. So if we divide that by 3, it all works out, right? 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours for school, 8 hours for yourself, family, friends, if you need to work part-time, all that stuff. But if you don't have that context to begin, everything's mishmashed and then it's all over the place. There's lack of sleep. It all affects everything, right? And then your lack of sleep affects who you're being when you show up in a relationship. And then maybe you're communicating as a jerk because you're tired. I mean, it all is connected. So that maker manager thing is, I think, crucial for college students to really take these principles of taking care of yourself and relationships and their academics and putting it into a container where then they can practice setting the boundary. And of course, again, because we're human, we're not always going to follow our schedule exactly, but at least we have something to reference versus nothing to reference, and then we're all over the place.
Love it. Really good stuff. You also talk about taking powerful action. Why do you feel that it is so important that we get support from others around us? Why is that so helpful for students in order to transform areas of their own lives?
Yeah, it's another great question. And I mean, that's first and foremost based upon my own personal experience. Um, I think the stigma for me as a college student was indicative of your example about walking to the counseling office is like, not asking for support. I got this on my own. I mean, we're a culture. Here we go with the political tone of our conversation. Here we are as a culture of independence, right? I mean, that's what our country's founded on. So I think there's this independence kind of, I've got this, we can do, like there's this strive. And really, from my perspective, it's interdependent. So it's not codependent, but it's not totally independent. It's like this interdependence indicative of the consensus stuff that you were mentioning of like, how do we all work together? How do we support each other so that we can support ourselves? And I think it's true in my experience working with human beings that support is important. And there's research to back this as well. Interestingly enough, there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Gail Matthews out of the Dominican University in California who did research on goal setting in it. And it really transitions into this support thing. And what he found is that if you write down a goal, it'll increase your chances of achieving it by 39.5% than if you don't. But if you write down a goal and you get accountability around it, somebody checking in with you, supporting you in this context, it'll increase your chances of achieving it by almost 80% than if you don't. That's astounding. It's astounding, but it makes sense, right? Because we're human again. I mean, I can talk myself out of things without anybody knowing every day, right? Or the postponement of them. And I don't know about you, I've never seen anybody accept an award at an award show or ceremony and walk up to the podium and say, I have nobody to thank. Never seen it happen. There's a long list. They have to be pulled off the stage oftentimes. You can't get to where you want to be, whether that's internally, externally, all of the above, in my experience, without the support of other human beings. That's what we're here for, I believe, is to really to support each other.
Yeah, those are excellent examples. And that's probably why study groups work out so well when other people are holding each other accountable. When you're going to the gym and you want results, then you either get, some kind of, coach, or you get somebody to work out with you. So that way, those days, which I know in college, I had where I just didn't feel like getting out of bed and going to the gym. I had literally my big brother in the fraternity come over to my room at the fraternity house, literally pick me up and say, "You're going."
Yep.
And it was that accountability piece. And, before you know it, after 2 months of doing this every day, then it becomes part of the routine. And then it's much easier to do it.
Yep.
So yeah, I like that accountability piece. I think that's really, really critical. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is service. That is something that is ingrained in fraternity and sorority life. So that's one of the things that I appreciate so much about fraternity and sorority is the giving to others and this idea that we have a responsibility to help our community and make it better because we're there. Like that is
Yep.
our function. And we are very privileged to go to these colleges and universities all over the country. Not everybody in this country gets the opportunity to go to college. So, why is service to others so important in the lives of college students?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head. We are privileged,
Mm,
really.
mm,
And how because of that privilege, how can we serve others? And that doesn't even mean serving underprivileged people. I think indicative of what you just said about, from my perspective, we're here to support each other. It's like, how can we use our gifts that each of us have, um, not only as a college student, but in our careers moving forward, to serve others. And again, I think that, and not that social media is bad, not that money's bad. I don't want to get into that whole conversation, but I think like with anything, it can, there's a spectrum of how it can be used. It's like when you're, I think it's so easy in our culture to be money focused with careers, and self focused with things like social media and all that stuff. And again, there's a time and a place for that. But my experience is that we do have an opportunity to use our gifts to serve others and, to take the focus off of ourselves. And interestingly enough, in my experience as in my own career, and it's part of why I'm doing this podcast with you, is the more that we can serve other people and with the gifts that we have, um, the money comes anyways, right? Like that's what really, it's like, what do people need? How can I best serve them with the tools I have? So I think for college students, going back to the examples you've used throughout this conversation about I wish I would have as a college student, it's like I wish I would have as a college student been asking myself, how can I use my gifts? That means you have to identify what your gifts are, right? And be aware of that. And then also to serve other people. And then that trajectory, I mean, it would have landed me here probably a lot sooner, but it is what it is. So I think the fact that college students and what you're doing with, the fraternities and sororities and that being ingrained in that culture, they're already ahead of the game. And so I think it's fantastic. I think the only thing I'll say about it, is that because sometimes service can be, again, I look at things on a spectrum, and it's like you got selfishness here and you got service here. Sometimes with the encouragement of being of service and having that as a principle, people can go to the opposite end of the spectrum where they totally discount themselves. So they're giving at the expense of themselves. And I see this a lot with people in service-based industries, that they're so focused on serving others that they don't take care of them. So I'm all about going back to the beginning of this conversation. You asked me about, taking care of yourself, essentially, in the physical emotion. It's like we got to take care of ourselves so we can be the best version of ourselves, and then use our vehicle of ourself to then best serve others, and then be aware of that on a regular basis so that we can show up as powerfully as possible. Because if we start overextending ourselves, we're not going to be able to give whoever we're serving the best version of ourselves, and then they're getting a 50% version. And yes, it's some service, but then like it's draining your energy. And is that really healthy? It's like this, like if we really want to, give our full potential, our fullest in this moment, so that people can receive our greatest gifts, we have to take into consideration ourselves in the process.
All great points. There's a great book called Servant Leadership, written by Greenleaf. I'd highly suggest reading that particular book. And in it, he really does talk about the importance of service and giving back to your community. And ultimately, to your point about profit and money, there's only so much you can do with, money in terms of, motivating other people, right? If you really want to build something wonderful, if you really want to build an incredible company, figure out how to engage that service component with your employees, because ultimately that's how you're going to capture their hearts and their minds and their bodies. There's only so much you can do with a paycheck, with just money producing widgets. The question is, how are you making this world a better place? And if you can make your employees feel like that's what they're doing, they're much more likely to stay with you and to be engaged employees.
Absolutely. And to throw a little book reference out, and I haven't read it, just to be transparent, but I did listen to a podcast recently. Simon Sinek has a new book out called Infinite Game. And the podcast I listened to him explaining kind of the gist of it is exactly that. Is
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's about human beings and being of service. The money and the numbers are important, but oftentimes we can flip the balance, especially in our culture, to be focused on that first and foremost, and then things fall apart pretty quickly. It's not a long-term sustainable plan. And if you're looking
No.
for a long-term sustainable, either as an employee or as a business owner, that's the way to go.
100%. Now, what's your TEDx talk about that you did for college students, and how is that different from the presentations that you give at colleges across the United States?
Yeah, so the presentations I give at colleges across the US really is just going a little bit deeper on everything we've talked about here, and kind of the principles of taking care of yourself, and communication and time management and action and service. The TEDx talk I did was based upon um, me essentially trying to be superhuman for a long time.
Mm.
So all the things we just talked about, I was pretty adamant at one point in my life about like being the best at everything. Like I wanted to be the best coach, the best husband, the best father, the best, like everything, like superhuman. And that included spirituality. I was like, I want to be enlightened and all the things, everything, just everything. I want to just like be a beaming shine of light. And I had a breakdown in 2009, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And so that breakdown, interestingly enough, not only was very humbling and had me re-enter my life more accepting of being a human, not trying to be superhuman,
Mhm.
but also had a pretty profound spiritual experience during that time. And so my TEDx talk really hones in on the spirituality component. And what I found interesting over the past number of years is that, and there's a great book called Cultivating the Spirit. Alexander Aston and his wife Helen, renowned professors at UCLA, did a 5-year study on spirituality in college students a while back, and they wrote a book based upon this. There's a lot of great research that shows that, and you mentioned it at the beginning of this podcast, right? It's like you're talking about yoga and meditation, and
Mhm.
and there's still support systems for that in the college arena, I think more so now than ever before. And a lot of it was because of their advocacy to have more conversations about spirituality, et cetera, on campuses, even, I mean, especially non-religious campuses, because spirituality, it's like, it's often not, it's, again, it's like public speaking, not a required class. Like, let's talk about spirituality. How's that inform your decisions and all that? I decided to broach the subject matter because what a lot of my students didn't know, in my classroom, and a lot of people don't know, is that informs a lot of what I do on a regular basis. And so I wanted to share my experience in hopes that it would open up some dialogue for college students about it. And interestingly enough, you mentioned, I lead up, I'm about to start a podcast like type thing for college students where, the first few minutes of the podcast, we actually meditate. So it's like there's meditation, and then there's conversations around spirituality and how that informs life and all that. So that's how it's different. It really just kind of focuses on that component. And again, it may or may not be for all college students, but it's something that I feel called at this point to share a little bit more about my experience and help other college students navigate theirs.
Yeah, well, this has been great. This has been really, really good for college students. Now, I love that Santa Cruz area of California that you're in. It's absolutely stunning. If you've never been to Monterey Bay, I highly suggest going out there and going to check it out for yourself. I was just actually out in California and just hit the beach over at Laguna,
Oh
and it
yeah.
was just fantastic. It's just
Yeah.
mesmerizing. I mean, there are pictures of me looking at the ocean just completely mesmerized. Like, how is this even possible? How is this real? So the next time I'm in the area of
Yep.
cruise, where should I go for a great meal these days?
Well, first of all, let me know before you come and I'll take you here.
All
Okay.
right.
And hold me to that.
All right.
So for anybody listening, if you want to visit the Santa Cruz area, you got to go to the Pleasure Point area. So if you Google Pleasure Point, that's the hippest part of Santa Cruz at this point. Um, the best place to go eat. Do you like hamburgers?
Of course. Who doesn't like hamburgers?
Well,
Yes.
vegans.
I guess that's not me though.
Yeah. Um, so the best hamburger around here, hands down, actually that I've had, I can almost say ever, is at a restaurant called Suda, Suda. And
Okay.
it's a hip environment, but they've got a great, any food there is good that I've tried, but I'm the type of guy, if I find something I like, I stick with it.
Mhm.
Hamburger all day long there.
All right. Suda.
Yep.
I like it. I like it. All right. So I'm definitely going to have to go and check that out the next time I'm in Santa Cruz. That sounds very, very good to me. So I will definitely check it out and we'll go hit that up together for sure the next time
Yeah.
I'm in Santa Cruz.
Let me know.
Yeah, I am looking forward to it. All right. So if our listeners, if they want to book you to speak on their college campus, where should they go in order to connect with you?
Yep. Clint Pardoe, ClintPardoe.com, and then /college. And then that'll drive you to my website. It's pretty self-explanatory. You click on speaking, and then you can fill out an interest form. Also on that site, just indicative of what I shared with you a few minutes ago, based upon your question, is a link to my TEDx talk, as well as information if you're interested in joining the meditations and conversations I mentioned too. So all the things that I'm doing at this particular juncture that I've revised recently, you can go to clintpardo.com /college.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Clint. This has been so helpful. I really appreciate you being on the show with us today.
Hey, Michael, it's been my pleasure. Thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, our pleasure. And to our listening audience, if you enjoyed this conversation with Clint, I want you to like this on social media and I want you to share it with all the college students that need to hear his message. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much. See you next time.